I have a prediction about the future of the console market to share with you. Let's debate the finer points in the comments below, but first, my opinion. I'm Tarmack and this is Feature Creep. The 7th generation of consoles, those being the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, was the longest hardware cycle for gamers that has happened to date. It included some 80+ million Xbox 360 consoles, some of which still get sold even now, and 80+ million PlayStation 3 units, and painfully, it lasted for around 9 years. The 8th generation of console hardware, however, ran into something of a snag in production. While the PlayStation 4 currently has a pretty solid sales lead, somewhere in the 40 million range currently, Microsoft has been trailing behind with around half of that, leading to a substantial disparity in the potential market for developers to make games on the Xbox One. The PlayStation 4 and Xbox One on launch were being outperformed by even mid-range personal computers, not a very good start to a console generation that was likely expected to last another 9 years. Now, I'm primarily a PC gamer, so obviously there's a fair bit of bias, but from an objective standpoint, performance is unlikely to increase on the console substantially, or more to the point, certainly won't progress as fast as the PC market will. I do have a PlayStation 4 and I quite enjoy it, but most of my time is spent on the PC. What we've seen over the past decade, unfortunately, whether being actively told to or just subconsciously avoiding it, is developers not allowing their games to perform better on PC than on console. We've had the infamous marketing push to try and convince gamers that they're stupid and can't tell the difference between 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. After all, your eyes can't tell the difference at all, or something condescending like that. Rather than just coming out and saying, you know what, we've decided that we want to push the graphical fidelity, and that means a reduction in frame rate. The problem is that this has resulted in games having frame rate limits even on PCs that could handle the load. In addition, we've had poor ports galore, terrible PC support, and all manner of issues that really have made PC gamers a bit on the bitter side, feeling like second-class citizens at worst, or an afterthought at best. So isn't it interesting to then watch how the landscape has changed in just the last couple of years? A year and a half ago, I made a video talking about the future of retail video games, and I made a few claims in that video that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be seeing the death of retail game sales. I also said at that time that I would do a video on the hardware side, and that's what this is. At the time, I said that the future will merely be streaming boxes like Chromecast, with processing happening off-site. Obviously, we're not there yet, but I still believe that this is where everything will eventually go. Unfortunately, at the time, I said that the next console generation would be that streaming box, and as it turns out, our next console generation may not actually come, so I've needed to revise my predictions. What has happened very recently are a few incredibly important announcements and rumors that shed some light on the direction the major players in the game industry are trying to go, and amusingly, they're both moving in the same direction. First, let's talk about Microsoft. There's been a lot of discussion surrounding the Universal Windows Platform app-style design, which effectively is a merging of the Xbox One and Windows architecture, but done in an Apple iOS sort of way. I'm sure there's more to it than just running exactly the same app on both systems, outside of basic hardware QA at least, but the point is that this is very clearly to allow Microsoft to leverage the fact that they are the majority OS market share, and of course shore up some of their less impressive than intended console gamer numbers, which is also less than half of what Sony has. The interesting thing to me about this is that it signals a design change mentality for game developers. Traditionally, developing for console results in very specialized systems particular to the console itself. If, however, that architecture is extremely similar inside of DirectX 12 under Windows 10, then hard-coding performance metrics such as tying game logic to the frame rate quickly moves from poor but acceptable design on consoles to extremely bad design on PC. In addition to the functional swapping between Xbox One and PC, it is possible for the Xbox One to stream games to a Windows 10 personal computer as well now. There's the beginning of that streaming future I was talking about. And you don't actually need a decent PC to play games anymore if you have an Xbox One. Granted, your performance will be limited by the Xbox One hardware, but far more people have a low-spec computer than a high-spec one, and this is a big change. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, the Xbox One doesn't yet act as a streaming box for PC games, but Microsoft has expressed intent to move in that direction. Then there was also a rumor that Microsoft was developing an Xbox 1.5, though that rumor was squashed by Phil Spencer, who said that if they're going to move forward, he wants to move forward in big numbers. Of course, the devil's advocate inside of me says that it would be pretty stupid to confirm an Xbox 1.5 before it's ready, because that would tank Xbox One sales even further as people start to wait for the next iteration. The entire reason that this rumor exists, though, is because of Sony. As it turns out, Sony is developing a PlayStation 4.5. This is still not publicly announced by Sony, but has been independently confirmed by multiple game news outlets. We even have some specs, including the ability to display scaled-up 4K resolution, a $400 price tag, and a last quarter of 2016 release date. What an interesting development that is, eh? Now, why do you suppose Sony is doing a PlayStation 4.5? Well, it's most likely a combination of factors. The PS4 was underpowered on launch, as I mentioned earlier, with mid-range PCs outperforming it. I personally feel that the 4K resolution bit is a misnomer, because 4K TVs aren't anywhere near a majority market share yet. It seems to me that this is primarily to increase game performance, because of course if it can handle scaled up 4K, it can do 1080p very nicely, and also to handle the load that PlayStation VR has to give. To date, a number of the PSVR titles that have been tested with what review hardware people have involve some pretty rough performance. The same is actually true on PC as well, so the PS4 obviously needs some kind of upgrade to keep the PSVR titles out of the realm of tech demos. But that's not all Sony is doing. A recent patch for the PlayStation 4 enabled streaming from the console to a PC. Oddly coincidental given what Microsoft is doing, don't you think? Certainly isn't the best streaming so far, but what we're seeing is an interesting move from both major console manufacturers to begin to encroach on Valve's PC territory and indeed competing with the Steam Link and even Steam machines, though granted the performance may not be a match yet. And to take it a step further, Sony has even begun discussing the PlayStation VR having PC compatibility. So, we've come at last to a few predictions about the future of the console market and gaming in general. What we're seeing right now are posturing plays to increase the potential reach of the consoles, as well as some incremental moves to increase performance. This ultimately is a concession that this current console generation is having some problems. These moves also draw a very strong comparison to the method of development that Apple has been using for the iPhone. The operating system is largely the same with incremental improvements. The OS also runs on multiple sets of hardware, and that's the crux of what I think is happening in the gaming space. Both Microsoft and Sony are positioning themselves in such a way as to defeat the purpose of such a hardline console generation to generation structure. What we may, and indeed what I think we will see over the next few years, are more iterative steps to take advantage of the fast-growing PC gaming market. I will not be surprised if Microsoft releases an Xbox 1.5. In fact, given that the Xbox One architecture is mirrored to Windows 10 to some degree, the Xbox One is basically a PC at this point, albeit an underpowered one. It doesn't take very much to make the jump from that to a SteamOS-like design and start to push simplistic hardware iteration as well. We have to keep in mind that the reason the consoles are successful outside of an amazing marketing campaign is that they are simple. You always know when buying games that they will just work, and you don't have to worry about whether your graphics card is powerful enough or any other piece of hardware you may have. Sony, unfortunately, is a bit behind in this respect because they don't have a major OS to leverage. This is why I believe that they're focusing on the hardware iteration and PC integration now. It's the most logical move given what Microsoft is doing. They certainly won this console generation by a 2-to-1 margin, but what about the next one? Well, actually, outside of the NX, I don't think we're going to see another console generation in the same way that they have historically occurred. More likely, we're going to see the PlayStation and Xbox operating systems have major revisions much like iOS has. Microsoft is already moving to an app-style program with the Universal Windows Platform design, and once that basic OS structure exists, it will be possible for iterative hardware design to be successful. Oddly, even Nintendo is already doing this in case you didn't notice. Look at the plethora of DS and 3DS handhelds. Each one has games that are exclusive to a certain version, but backwards compatibility remains for older games. That, my friends, is what I believe to be the stopgap between the current console generation and the future of streaming game processing from a central server that, in my opinion, will be the norm at some point over the next decade. Iterative design rather than revolutionary design. And the best part of all of this is that the PC is very likely going to become the centerpiece of the whole structure. Why? Well, other than both Microsoft and Sony shifting to take a piece, it's because as a platform, it doesn't have any of the limitations associated with the existing console structure. And that is a good thing. So what do you think of the future of the console market? I asked the same question on the subreddit, reddit.com/r/tarmack, and I got some great responses and in-depth conversation. Speaking of, I need to get on handing out those codes that I promised I'd give away over there. Feature Creep is a regular show every week, assuming my home isn't being damaged by water like it was last week, so if you enjoy these, sub up, and if you want to help me out, post them online somewhere. It's always appreciated. That's all I have to say. Tarmack out.